The first thing Elara noticed about the castle was the silence. Not the peaceful quiet of a well-ordered household, but the oppressive hush of a place where joy had been systematically strangled. The obsidian walls seemed to swallow sound. Servants moved through corridors like ghosts, their footsteps muffled by thick carpets that had probably cost more than Elara's entire village. She clutched her worn traveling bag tighter as the head housekeeper, a severe woman named Madame Thorne, led her through endless hallways lined with portraits of stern-faced vampire ancestors. The prince's previous nannies lasted an average of 3 weeks, Madame Thorne said without turning around. Her voice echoed off the marble floors. The longest stayed 2 months before requesting immediate transfer to the Eastern Territories. Most simply fled in the middle of the night. Elara's stomach twisted, but she kept her voice steady. What happened to them? Nothing happened to them. That's the problem. Madame Thorne stopped before a pair of carved doors. They couldn't handle the crying. Night after night, hour after hour. The child never stops. And he never speaks. Not a single word in 7 years of life. 7 years old and has never spoken. Elara's heart clenched. Has anyone determined why? Every physician in the 3 vampire kingdoms has examined Prince Kieran. Blood magic specialists, ancient healers, human doctors at the king's insistence. Madame Thorne's expression was carefully neutral. They all say the same thing. There's nothing physically wrong with him. The child simply refuses to speak. Or can't, Elara said quietly. Madame Thorne's sharp eyes fixed on her. Lord Caspian doesn't tolerate excuses. The prince is 7 years old. Old enough to behave properly, speak properly, and represent the bloodline properly. The king believes the boy is defiant. Willfully silent out of spite or weakness. The way she said it made Elara's hands curl into fists. He's a child. He's the heir to the Nightfall Kingdom, Madame Thorne corrected coldly. And Lord Caspian has lost patience with him. Your job is not to coddle the prince or make excuses for him. Your job is to manage him. Keep him quiet during the day. Make sure he doesn't disturb the king. And above all, she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper, don't develop attachments. The king has been considering sending the boy to a remote estate. Out of sight, out of mind. Do you understand? Elara understood perfectly. This child had been abandoned by everyone who was supposed to protect him. I understand, she said. Madame Thorne pushed open the doors. The nursery was beautiful in the way a mausoleum is beautiful. Everything was expensive, ornate, perfect, and utterly devoid of warmth. Toys sat untouched on shelves, arranged with museum precision. Books lined the walls, their spines uncracked. A massive bed with silk curtains dominated one corner, big enough for 3 grown adults. And in the center of that enormous bed, curled into the smallest possible ball, was a child. Prince Kieran was small for 7 years old. His dark hair fell across his face in tangled waves, as if no one had brushed it in days. He wore silk pajamas that probably cost more than Elara's yearly salary, but they hung loose on his thin frame. His pale skin, vampire pale, not sickly pale, seemed almost translucent in the dim candlelight. He was crying. Soft, broken sobs that shook his small shoulders. The sound was heartbreaking, like something wounded and trapped. Your Highness, Madame Thorne said sharply. Your new nanny has arrived. Sit up and greet her properly. The boy's crying hitched, but he didn't move. Didn't even lift his head. Prince Kieran. Madame Thorne's voice turned icy. I will not repeat myself. Elara stepped forward before she could think better of it. It's all right. He doesn't need to. He needs to learn basic courtesy, Madame Thorne snapped. This is exactly the problem. Everyone makes allowances and the child learns nothing. She moved toward the bed. Get up. Now. Kieran's crying intensified. His small hands clutched at the sheets, and Elara saw something that made her blood run cold. His knuckles were white. Not from gripping the fabric too tightly but from old scars. Dozens of them, crisscrossing his small hands like a map of pain. Stop. Elara's voice came out harder than she intended. Please, Madame Thorne. Let me. The housekeeper's eyebrows rose. You've been here less than 5 minutes and you're already? I'm asking for the chance to do my job, Elara said firmly. You hired me to care for him. Let me try my way first. For a long moment, Madame Thorne stared at her. Then she nodded curtly. 1 week. If there's no improvement, you'll be dismissed like the others. And the prince will be sent away. She swept from the room, the doors closing behind her with a sound like a coffin ceiling. Elara waited until the footsteps faded. Then she approached the bed slowly, the way you'd approach a frightened animal. Kieran, she said softly. My name is Elara. I'm from a village called Millbrook. It's about 3 days' ride from here, down in the valley where they grow the red wheat. The crying didn't stop, but it quieted slightly. I know you probably don't want another nanny, Elara continued, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that he'd know she was there. I know I'm just another stranger in a long line of strangers. But I'm going to tell you something true, and you can decide if you believe me. She took a breath. I don't think you're being difficult. I don't think you're choosing to be silent. I think something is very, very wrong and no one has listened to you. The crying stopped. Complete, absolute silence fell over the room. Slowly, so slowly, Kieran lifted his head. Elara's breath caught. His eyes were the most striking thing about him. One amber like autumn leaves, one silver like moonlight. Heterochromia, the mark of powerful vampire bloodlines. But it was the expression in those mismatched eyes that broke her heart. Desperation. Pure, aching desperation. He opened his mouth. His lips moved, forming words with careful precision. But no sound came out. Nothing. Not even a whisper of breath. He tried again, his small face contorting with effort. Still nothing. Tears spilled down his cheeks, not the tears of a tantrum, but the tears of someone who had tried and failed 1,000 times and knew he would fail again. Elara's throat tightened. Oh, sweetheart. You're trying so hard, aren't you? Kieran nodded frantically. His hands moved to his throat, clawing at his own neck as if trying to tear something away. The gesture was so violent, so desperate, that Elara grabbed his wrists on instinct. Shush. It's okay. Stop, you're hurting yourself. She looked down at his hands again. The scars weren't from accidents or typical childhood roughhousing. They were deliberately placed, all concentrated around his fingertips and palms. Like he'd been trying to dig something out of his own throat for years. Something is stopping you from speaking, Elara said slowly. Something physical. Can you nod if I'm right? Kieran nodded so hard she worried he'd hurt his neck. Does it hurt? He nodded again, one hand pressed to his throat. Can you show me where? Kieran's small fingers touched the base of his throat, just above his collarbone. He pressed there, then moved his fingers in a circle around his entire neck, like he was indicating a band or collar. Something around your throat, Elara murmured. But the doctors didn't see anything? Kieran shook his head violently. Then he made a gesture like pushing something away, his face twisted with frustration. They looked but didn't see, Elara translated. Something invisible. Something magical? The relief that flooded Kieran's face was answer enough. He grabbed her hand and squeezed it with surprising strength, nodding over and over. Someone did this to you on purpose. Elara's voice hardened. Someone put a curse on you to take your voice away. Kieran's eyes filled with fresh tears, but he nodded. Does your father know? The boy's entire body went rigid. He yanked his hand back and shook his head so violently that his hair flew. Then he made a gesture like pushing something away. No, not pushing. Dismissing. Throwing away. He doesn't believe you, Elara breathed. You tried to tell him and he didn't believe you. Kieran's face crumpled. He buried his face in his hands, his thin shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Elara felt rage building in her chest. A child had been cursed, had been crying for help for 7 years, and everyone, had decided he was just being difficult. Listen to me, Kieran. She waited until he looked up, his tear-streaked face barely visible through his fingers. I believe you. Do you understand? I believe something was done to you. And I'm going to figure out what it is and how to break it. The hope that flickered in his mismatched eyes was painful to see. But I need you to help me, Elara continued. Can you show me? If someone cursed you, when did it happen? How old were you? Kieran held up 3 fingers. 3 years old, Elara whispered. You've been silent for 4 years. He nodded miserably. Do you remember who did it? Kieran's hands started trembling. He looked toward the door, then back at Elara, terror clear on his face. It's all right if you can't tell me, Elara said quickly. We'll figure it out together. But I need to understand what I'm looking for. This curse or spell, can other people see it? The doctors, the healers. Kieran shook his head. But you can feel it. Every moment of every day. He nodded, one small hand pressed to his throat again. Elara thought back to her grandmother's stories. She'd been raised by a woman who still practiced the old human faiths, the ones that predated vampire rule. Her grandmother had taught her about sight magic, about glamours and hidden curses, about the difference between looking and seeing. Kieran, she said carefully, I'm going to try something. It might not work. but my grandmother taught me a few things about seeing what's hidden. May I? Kieran nodded eagerly. Elara closed her eyes and whispered the old prayer her grandmother had taught her. Words in a language that predated modern speech, words that humans had used when they still had their own magic, before the vampire kingdoms rose. By sight that pierces, by truth that reveals, show me what eyes alone cannot see. She opened her eyes and looked at Kieran's throat. At first nothing. Then, slowly like mist parting, she saw it. A collar. Not made of metal or leather but of shadow itself. It wrapped around Kieran's small neck like a serpent, pulsing with malevolent energy. Dark tendrils extended from it, reaching down into his throat, wrapping around his vocal cords like strangling vines. Oh gods, Elara breathed. I can see it. Kieran's eyes went wide. He grabbed her arms, his expression desperate. It's shadow magic, Elara said, her mind racing. Someone bound your voice with shadow itself. That's why the doctors couldn't see it. Shadow magic doesn't show up in physical examinations. It's not a curse on your body. It's a curse on your voice itself. Kieran nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face again. But this time they were tears of relief. Someone finally saw. Someone finally understood. Who did this to you? Elara asked gently. Can you try to tell me? It's important, Kieran. If we don't know who cast it, we might not be able to break it safely. Kieran's hands trembled violently. He pointed to the door, then made a gesture like placing a crown on his head. Royalty, Elara said. Someone from the royal household. He nodded, then made a gesture like sweeping robes, followed by placing his hand at a height well above his own head. A tall adult in royal robes. Elara's stomach sank. Kieran, was it your father? The boy's face twisted with anguish. He shook his head frantically, then made the crown gesture again, but this time added a second gesture, pushing something away, the same dismissive motion he'd made before. Not your father directly, but someone he trusts, Elara interpreted. Someone close to the throne. Kieran nodded miserably. And you tried to tell your father, but he didn't believe you. He thought you were making excuses. Another nod. Then Kieran made a gesture that chilled Elara to her bones. He mimicked someone turning away, walking away, closing a door. The rejection was clear in every movement. He gave up on you, Elara whispered. Kieran buried his face in his hands again, and this time Elara pulled him close. The boy stiffened at first, probably not used to being touched with kindness, but then melted into her arms, his silent sobs shaking them both. I won't give up on you, Elara promised fiercely. I don't care who cast this curse or how powerful they are. We're going to break it. And when we do, the first thing you're going to say is whatever you've been holding inside for 4 years. Kieran pulled back just enough to look at her. His mismatched eyes were red from crying, but something else shone there now. Oh. He pointed at Elara, then pressed both hands over his heart. You trust me, she said softly. Thank you, Kieran. I promise I'm going to earn that trust. A knock at the door made them both jump. Madame Thorne's voice came through the wood. Miss Elara. Lord Caspian requests your presence in his study. Immediately. Elara's heart sank. She'd been here less than an hour and was already being summoned by the vampire king. That couldn't be good. I have to go talk to your father, she told Kieran quietly. But I'll be back. I promise. And while I'm gone, I want you to rest. No more crying if you can help it. Save your energy. We're going to need it. Kieran nodded, but his hands clutched at her sleeve, reluctant to let her go. I'll be back, Elara repeated. She gently pried his fingers loose and stood. I promise. As she followed Madame Thorne through the castle's winding corridors, Elara's mind raced. She'd found the source of Kieran's silence in less than an hour. The shadow collar was real, visible to anyone with the right kind of sight. But who had placed it? And more importantly, why? A 3-year-old child, cursed into permanent silence. Someone had wanted to ensure the vampire heir could never speak. Never communicate. Never tell what he might have seen or heard. The question was, what had little Kieran witnessed that was worth silencing him forever? The king's study. Lord Caspian's study was everything Elara expected from a vampire king who had ruled for 3 centuries. Dark wood paneling, shelves lined with ancient books, weapons mounted on the walls like trophies. A fire burned in the hearth despite the summer warmth, casting dancing shadows across the room. The king himself stood by the window, his back to her. He was tall, powerfully built, with dark hair that fell to his shoulders. He wore black, as seemed to be required for vampire royalty, with silver accents that caught the firelight. Miss Elara. His voice was deep, cold, completely devoid of warmth. Madame Thorne tells me you've been with my son for less than an hour. Yes, your majesty. And already you're making excuses for his behavior. Elara's hands clenched at her sides. I'm not making excuses, your majesty. I'm making observations. Are you? Caspian turned and Elara's breath caught despite herself. He was beautiful the way a blade is beautiful. Sharp cheekbones, pale skin, eyes the color of fresh blood. But there was no warmth in that face, no softness. He looked at her the way a scientist might examine an insect under glass, with detached curiosity and faint contempt. 27 nannies before you, Caspian said, moving to his desk. 27 women who were convinced they could fix my son. Who thought his silence was a puzzle they alone could solve. Who wasted my time and my gold with theories and excuses. He sat, steepling his fingers. What makes you think you'll be any different? Because I've seen what they couldn't see, Elara said before she could stop herself. Caspian's eyebrows rose a fraction. Explain. Your son isn't choosing to be silent, your majesty. He's been cursed. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Caspian's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his blood-red eyes. Cursed, he repeated, his voice soft and deadly. That's your professional assessment after 1 hour with the boy. Cursed. Yes, your majesty. And I suppose you're the only person capable of seeing this curse? Despite the dozens of magical healers, blood specialists and ancient practitioners I've brought to examine him. They were looking for physical ailments or standard magical afflictions. Elara pressed on even as fear made her voice shake. What's been done to Prince Kirin is different. It's shadow magic. Enough. Caspian's voice cracked like a whip. He stood and suddenly the space between them felt like nothing at all. I've heard this theory before. It's a curse, your majesty. It's dark magic, your majesty. Some invisible force that only I can perceive. Do you know what every single one of those charlatans wanted? Gold. Power. A permanent position in the royal household. I want none of those things. You want what they all want. To be the savior. To be special. Caspian's lip curled. My son is 7 years old and has never spoken a single word. Do you know what that makes him in the eyes of the vampire courts? Weak. Defective. Unfit to rule. The naked pain in those words made Elara's heart clench, but she forced herself to keep talking. He's not defective. He's been silenced. He's been examined by the greatest magical minds in 3 kingdoms. Caspian's composure finally cracked, rage flooding through. Every test, every spell, every ritual. They all say the same thing. There is nothing wrong with him. His vocal cords are perfect. His throat is undamaged. His mind is sound. He simply refuses to speak. Your Majesty, if you would just listen. I have listened. For 7 years I've listened to excuses. I've listened to theories. I've listened to promises of cures that never materialize. Caspian moved to the window again, his back rigid. Do you know what the other vampire lords say about my son? They call him the silent shame. They say the Nightfall bloodline has been weakened. That I should set him aside and produce a new heir. Then they're fools, Elara said quietly. Caspian turned sharply. What did you say? I said they're fools, your majesty. Elara met his blood-red eyes without flinching. Because anyone who spends more than 5 minutes with your son can see that he's desperate to communicate. He's not choosing silence. Something is physically preventing him from speaking. And if the other vampire lords can't see that, if they'd rather mock a child than investigate what's really wrong, then they're fools and cowards. For a long moment, Caspian stared at her. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, Miss Elara. No one speaks to me that way. Then perhaps they should, Elara said, her fear giving way to anger. Because from where I'm standing, your majesty, your son has been suffering for 4 years, crying out for help in every way he can, and you've decided he's being difficult instead of listening to him. I have spent 7 years. You've spent 7 years consulting experts who told you what you wanted to hear, Elara interrupted. That there's nothing wrong. That he'll grow out of it. That it's behavioral. But you haven't spent 7 years actually watching him, have you? When was the last time you sat with your son? Held him? Tried to understand what he's going through? The look Caspian gave her could have frozen blood. You forget yourself. No, your majesty. I think you've forgotten your son. The words hung in the air like a drawn blade. Caspian moved with vampire speed, suddenly inches from Elara's face. Give me one reason I shouldn't have you removed from this castle immediately. Because I can prove it, Elara said, forcing her voice to stay steady despite her hammering heart. Give me 1 week. If I can't show you proof that your son has been cursed, solid, visible proof, then I'll leave without complaint and never speak of this again. But if I'm right... She paused. If I'm right, Your Majesty, then you owe your son an apology for 7 years of dismissing his pain. Caspian's eyes narrowed. You presume much, human? I presume nothing. I'm offering you the truth. The question is whether you're brave enough to face it. For a long moment, Caspian studied her with an intensity that made Elara feel transparent. Then slowly he stepped back. 1 week, he said coldly. You will have full access to my son, the royal library, and any magical resources you require. If at the end of that week you have found nothing, if this is another elaborate deception, you will be banished from the Nightfall Kingdom permanently. And you will never work as a caregiver again. I will ensure it. Understood, Your Majesty. Furthermore, Caspian continued, you will not fill my son's head with false hope. You will not promise him cures that don't exist. And you will not, his voice dropped to something deadly, make his suffering worse than it already is. Do we have an understanding? Elara met his gaze. We do. Then get out of my sight. Elara turned to leave but paused at the door. Your Majesty? One more thing. What? When I prove I'm right, and I will prove it, the first thing your son deserves to hear from you is, I'm sorry. She left before Caspian could respond, but she felt his gaze burning into her back all the way down the corridor. The hidden library. Elara spent the next 3 days in the castle's archives, searching for any information about shadow magic, voice curses, or silencing spells. She barely slept, surviving on coffee and determination. Kieran visited her every afternoon, sitting quietly in the corner while she read. The boy had stopped crying at least during the day. Instead, he drew pictures, disturbing images of shadows with teeth, of hands reaching from darkness, of small figures with X's over their mouths. On the 3rd day, Elara found it. The book was ancient, its leather cover cracked with age. Forbidden Arts of the Shadow Court was written in faded gold lettering across the spine. Inside, one chapter made her blood run cold. The silencing collar, a curse of shadow binding, used to prevent testimony or communication. Most often employed against witnesses to crimes of the Shadow Court. The collar feeds on fear and pain, growing stronger the more the victim attempts to speak. Only visible to those trained in sight magic or blood descendants of the original casters. Warning, the silencing collar grows with the victim. If not removed before their 10th birthday, it becomes permanent, fusing with their very essence. The victim will be mute for the remainder of their life, unable to communicate through speech, writing, or magical means. Elara's hands trembled as she read further. To break the collar, 3 things are required. 1. The blood of the one who cast it, freely given. 2. The tears of the one who suffers. 3. The voice of one who speaks truth in place of lies. Kieran was 7. That gave them less than 3 years before the curse became permanent. Your Highness, Elara said softly. Kieran looked up from his drawings. I found it. I found what was done to you. The hope that flooded his face was beautiful and heartbreaking. It's called a silencing collar, Elara explained, moving to sit beside him. It's shadow magic designed to prevent someone from speaking about something they witnessed. Kieran. She paused, choosing her words carefully. When you were 3 years old, did you see something? Something bad? Something someone didn't want you to tell anyone about? Kieran's face went pale. He nodded slowly, his hands starting to tremble. Can you show me? Draw it. The boy grabbed a piece of parchment and began to sketch with shaking hands. The image that emerged made Elara's stomach turn. It showed the throne room. A tall figure in royal robes, not the king but someone else, someone with a crown of thorns drawn carefully on their head. And at the tall figure's feet, lying in a pool of red that could only be blood, was a smaller figure. A woman with long hair. Who is this? Elara whispered, pointing to the woman. Kieran's tears started falling. He drew a heart next to the woman's figure, then pointed to himself. Your mother? Elara breathed. Kieran, is this your mother? He nodded, tears streaming down his face. And this person here? Elara pointed to the tall figure with the thorn crown. They killed her? And you saw it? Another nod. Kieran's whole body shook with silent sobs. And then they cursed you so you could never tell anyone. Kieran collapsed against her, his small body racked with grief he'd carried alone for 4 years. Elara held him, her mind racing. Queen Seraphina had died 4 years ago. The official story was that she'd fallen ill, some kind of wasting sickness that even vampire constitution couldn't fight. But if Kieran had witnessed her murder? The person who did this, Elara said carefully. Are they still in the castle? Kieran nodded against her shoulder. Do you see them often? Another nod. His hands clutched at her dress and she could feel his terror. It's someone your father trusts. Kieran pulled back just enough to nod emphatically. Then he made that dismissive gesture again, the one he'd made when talking about his father. Your father doesn't know, Elara said. He thinks your mother died naturally. He has no idea she was murdered and he has no idea you witnessed it. Kieran's face crumpled with fresh anguish. He pointed to his mouth, then made a frustrated pushing motion, trying to speak, unable to speak, dismissed for his silence. You tried to tell him but you couldn't form the words. And without words, he didn't understand what you were trying to say. The boy nodded miserably. Elara's heart broke for him. A 3-year-old child, watching his mother murdered, then cursed into silence before he could tell anyone. 4 years of carrying that terrible secret, 4 years of trying desperately to communicate, 4 years of being dismissed as difficult or defective. Kieran, she said firmly, waiting until he looked at her. We're going to break this curse. We're going to find out who did this. And we're going to make sure they face justice for what they did to you and your mother. Do you understand? Kieran nodded, but his expression was doubtful. As if he'd stopped believing justice was possible. I know you're scared, Elara continued. I know you've tried to tell people before and no one listened. But I'm listening now. And I'm not going to stop until this is fixed. The boy studied her face for a long moment. Then slowly he reached out and took her hand. His small fingers squeezed hers once, a gesture of trust. Now, Elara said looking back at the book. According to this, we need 3 things to break the curse. Your tears, we have those. My voice speaking truth, I can do that. But the 3rd thing. She paused. We need the blood of whoever cast the curse. Freely given. Kieran's expression turned despairing. He shook his head violently. I know, Elara said. The person who did this isn't going to willingly give us their blood. Which means we need to figure out who they are first, then find a way to force them. She looked at the drawing again. The thorn crown was distinctive, not a real crown but a symbol of something. Power? Authority? A title? Kieran, this crown you drew. Is it something they actually wear or is it symbolic? The boy considered, then made a gesture like tracing a pattern in the air. Symbolic? It represents their position. Someone with authority. Elara's mind raced through the castle's hierarchy. The royal advisor? The high priest? Kieran suddenly gripped her arm, his eyes wide with terror. He was staring at something behind her. Elara turned. A figure stood in the archive doorway. Tall, imposing, dressed in elaborate robes of black and silver. They wore a ceremonial mask, a tradition of the royal council, but even through the mask, Elara could feel their gaze. How touching, a cold voice said. The new nanny thinks she can save the broken prince. Elara stood slowly, positioning herself between Kieran and the stranger. Who are you? I am Lord Thaddeus, first advisor to King Caspian. The figure stepped into the room and Elara noticed Kieran shrinking back, his face pale with terror. And you, Miss Elara, have been asking dangerous questions. I've been doing my job. Caring for the prince. Have you? Thaddeus moved closer and Elara caught a glimpse of his eyes through the mask. One was milky white, blind. The other was a deep, unnatural purple. Tell me, what have you learned in your research? Anything interesting? Every instinct screamed at Elara to lie, but Thaddeus's good eye fixed on the book open on the table. The chapter about silencing callers. Ah, he said softly. So you found it? The Shadow Court's most effective tool for ensuring silence. Elara's blood ran cold. You. Me, Thaddeus agreed almost pleasantly. He removed his mask, revealing a face that would have been handsome if not for the cruelty etched into every line. You're clever, Miss Elara. I'll give you that. Cleverer than the other nannies. Most of them never got past, the poor boy is just shy. You murdered Queen Seraphina, Elara said, her voice shaking with rage. And when Kieran witnessed it, you cursed him so he couldn't tell anyone. Witnessed? Thaddeus laughed. My dear, he didn't just witness it. The little prince was in his mother's arms when I drove the blade through her heart. He felt her blood on his face. Heard her last breath. It was really quite dramatic. Behind Elara, Kieran made a sound, not quite a scream, more like a wheeze of pure anguish. Why? Elara demanded. Why would you kill the queen? Because Seraphina was too clever for her own good, Thaddeus said, circling them slowly like a predator. She discovered what I'd been doing. The funds I'd diverted, the alliances I'd made with the Eastern courts, the plans I'd laid to ensure the Nightfall Kingdom would fall under my control. She was going to tell Caspian. So I did what was necessary. You're a monster. I'm practical. Thaddeus stopped in front of the doorway, blocking their exit. And now you've put me in an awkward position. I can't have you telling the king what you've learned. Which means... He drew a blade from his robes. You're going to have an unfortunate accident. A fall from the tower, perhaps. Or maybe the boy finally snapped and attacked his nanny. Yes, I rather like that story. Elara grabbed Kieran, pushing him behind her. Lord Caspian will know you're lying. Will he? Thaddeus smiled. Caspian thinks his son is defective. Wait, a disappointment. Do you really think he'll investigate too closely if the boy finally does something violent? He might even be relieved to have an excuse to send Kieran away permanently. You're wrong about him. Am I? Tell me, Miss Elara, when was the last time the king spent more than 5 minutes with his son? When did he last hold the boy? Comfort him? Show him any affection at all? Thaddeus's smile widened. Caspian has already given up on Kieran. That's what makes this all so perfect. The king's grief and guilt have made him blind to what's right in front of him. Elara's mind raced. She needed to keep Thaddeus talking, needed to buy time to think of a way out. If you kill me, others will ask questions, she said. The other servants, Madame Thorne, will be told the same story. And they'll believe it because it fits what they already think about the prince. Thaddeus raised the blade. I'm truly sorry, Miss Elara. You seem like a decent person. But you should have minded your own business. He lunged. Elara shoved Kieran aside and grabbed the only weapon she had, the heavy ancient book. She swung it with all her strength, catching Thaddeus across the face. The advisor staggered and Elara ran, dragging Kieran with her. They bolted through the archives, Thaddeus's roar of rage echoing behind them. Elara's heart hammered as she navigated the maze of bookshelves, Kieran's small hand clutched tight in hers. We need to find your father, she gasped. We need to tell him. A shadow appeared in front of them. Literally appeared, materializing from darkness itself. Thaddeus stood blocking their path, his face bleeding from where the book had struck him. Shadow magic, remember? He said coldly. I can move through darkness itself. You can't run from me. Elara spun, trying another direction, but more shadows rose around them. They were trapped. Now, Thaddeus said, advancing slowly. Let's end this. Elara held Kieran close, her mind racing for any possible escape. The boy was trembling against her, silent tears streaming down his face. The tears of the one who suffers. The words from the book flashed through Elara's mind. Kieran's tears. The second ingredient to break the curse. Kieran, she whispered urgently. Do you trust me? The boy looked up at her, confused and terrified. But he nodded. Then when I say run, you run. Don't look back. Find your father. Show him the drawing. Make him understand. Can you do that? Kieran shook his head frantically, clutching at her dress. He wouldn't leave her. You have to, Elara said firmly. You're the only one who can tell the truth about what happened to your mother. The only one who can stop him. Please, Kieran. Be brave. The boy's face crumpled, but after a moment he nodded. Thaddeus was almost upon them now, blade raised. Run. Elara screamed, shoving Kieran toward a gap in the shadows. The boy bolted. Thaddeus snarled and tried to follow, but Elara threw herself at him, grabbing his arm. Oh no, you don't. Thaddeus backhanded her with inhuman strength. Elara flew backward, crashing into a bookshelf. Pain exploded through her skull, her vision swimming. Through the haze, she saw Kieran disappearing through the archive doors. Safe. He'd gotten away. Stupid girl, Thaddeus spat, standing over her. You've only delayed the inevitable. I'll kill the boy next. Make it look like he fell down the stairs in his grief over losing his nanny. You won't, Elara gasped. Because he's going to tell his father everything. He can't tell anyone anything, Thaddeus said, raising the blade. That's the beauty of the silencing collar. He's voiceless. Powerless. No one will ever. A roar shook the archives. Not human. Not even vampire. Pure, incandescent rage-given sound. Thaddeus turned just as King Caspian appeared in the doorway. And Kieran stood beside him, tears streaming down his face, holding up the drawing of his mother's murder for his father to see. The breaking point. Caspian's face was carved from stone and fury. His blood-red eyes fixed on Thaddeus with such intensity that the air itself seemed to tremble. Explain, the king said, his voice deadly quiet. Explain to me why my son just ran into the throne room, tears streaming down his face, and showed me a drawing of you murdering my wife. Thaddeus's composure slipped. Just for a moment, panic flickered across his face. Then his mask snapped back into place. Your Majesty, the boy is disturbed. He's been filling his nanny's head with delusions. Kieran doesn't draw delusions. Caspian moved into the room with predatory grace. He draws truth. I know this because 4 years ago he drew a picture of the garden maze 2 days before I had it installed. He'd somehow seen the plans, understood them, and recreated them perfectly. My son is many things, Thaddeus, but he is not a liar. Then he's confused, misremembering? Is that my son's nanny bleeding on the floor? Thaddeus glanced at Elara, and in that moment, Caspian struck. The king moved with speed that made Thaddeus look frozen. One moment he was across the room. The next, he had Thaddeus pinned against the wall by his throat, feet dangling above the ground. I will ask you once, Caspian said, his voice colder than ice. And your answer will determine whether you die quickly or slowly. Did you kill my wife? Your Majesty, please? Caspian's hand tightened. Bones cracked. Wrong answer. Wait. Thaddeus choked out. Wait, I can explain. I'm listening. She was going to destroy everything. She discovered the treaties I'd negotiated with the Eastern courts, the plans for unification. She didn't understand, it was all for the good of the kingdom. You murdered my wife for political reasons. I did what you were too weak to do. Thaddeus's composure finally shattered completely. Serafina was going to expose me, ruin years of careful planning. The Eastern courts were ready to join with Nightfall under my leadership, and she was going to throw it all away because of some misguided sense of honor. Caspian's face showed no emotion at all. That somehow made him more terrifying than if he'd been raging. And my son. Collateral damage, Thaddeus spat. The boy saw what he shouldn't have seen. The silencing collar was mercy, I could have killed him too. From the doorway Kieran made a sound. Not quite a sob but close. Caspian's eyes flickered to his son, then back to Thaddeus. You cursed a 3-year-old child. My child. You took his voice so he couldn't tell me you'd murdered his mother. He would have ruined everything. He was 3 years old. Caspian's roar shook dust from the shelves. His hand tightened further, and Thaddeus's face began to turn purple. Your Majesty, Elara gasped from the floor. Don't kill him. Not yet. Caspian's head turned toward her. Why not? Because we need him alive. Elara forced herself to sit up despite the pain. To break the curse on Kieran, we need the blood of the one who cast it. Freely given. Understanding flickered in Caspian's eyes. He looked at Thaddeus. Freely given. I'll never, Thaddeus choked out. Oh, you will. Caspian's smile was terrifying. You will give every drop of blood in your body if that's what it takes to free my son. Because if you don't, I will spend the next century finding new and creative ways to make you suffer. Do we understand each other? Thaddeus's eyes rolled with fear. He tried to speak, couldn't, just nodded frantically. Caspian dropped him. Thaddeus collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. Guards, the king called. 6 vampire guards appeared instantly. Take Lord Thaddeus to the dungeons. He is to be kept alive and unharmed until I have need of him. Anyone who allows him to escape or take his own life will join him in the cells. Clear? Yes, Your Majesty. As the guards dragged Thaddeus away, the advisor locked eyes with Kieran. Even defeated, even caught, pure hatred burned in his gaze. You should have stayed silent, boy. I should have killed you when I had the chance. Kieran flinched, shrinking back. Remove him from my sight, Caspian said coldly. Before I forget my need for his blood and tear his throat out. The guards hauled Thaddeus away. His threats and curses echoed through the corridors until distance swallowed the sound. Silence fell over the archives. Caspian stood frozen, staring at the spot where Thaddeus had been. His hands trembled, the first sign of emotion breaking through his control. Father? Kieran's gesture was tentative. He took a small step forward. Caspian didn't move. Didn't look at his son. Your Majesty, Elara said softly. Kieran needs you. I know what my son needs, Caspian said, his voice rough. He needs a father who listened to him. Who believed him. Who protected him instead of dismissing him as defective. He finally turned to look at Kieran. The boy stood small and fragile in the doorway, tear tracks still visible on his face, his drawing clutched in his hands. For years, Caspian said, his voice breaking. For years you tried to tell me. For years I refused to see. Kieran's lower lip trembled. He took another step forward. I told myself you were being difficult, Caspian continued, and now tears were sliding down his face. I told myself that if I just found the right healer, the right treatment, you would speak. But the truth is I was angry at you. Angry that you wouldn't talk, wouldn't explain, wouldn't be the perfect heir I needed. Kieran shook his head frantically, new tears spilling. I was so consumed by my own grief over losing your mother that I couldn't see you were grieving too. Worse than grieving, you were trapped, voiceless, desperate to tell me what happened, and I. Caspian's composure shattered completely. I gave up on you. God forgive me, I gave up on my own son. Kieran dropped the drawing and ran. But not away. Toward. He crashed into his father's legs, his small arms wrapping around Caspian's waist, his body shaking with silent sobs. Caspian froze for just a moment. Then he dropped to his knees and pulled Kieran into his arms, holding his son like he was the most precious thing in the world. I'm sorry, Caspian whispered into Kieran's hair. I'm so sorry. I failed you. I failed your mother. I failed everyone who depended on me. But I swear to you, I swear on everything I am, I will make this right. We will break that curse. We will give you your voice back. And then you can tell me everything you've carried alone for so long. Kieran clung to his father, his thin shoulders heaving. For the first time in 4 years, someone was holding him. Someone was listening. Someone believed. Elara watched them, her own tears blurring her vision. This was what Kieran had needed all along. Not healers or medicines or theories. Just his father. Present. Believing. Loving him despite the silence. After a long moment, Caspian pulled back just enough to look at his son's face. Miss Elara, he said, his voice still rough. Can you walk? Yes, your majesty. Then come. All 3 of us are going to break this curse. Tonight. The ritual. They gathered in the throne room as midnight approached. Caspian had ordered everyone else out. This was private, family only. Elara laid out the book on the floor before the throne, the ritual instructions clear. Kieran sat beside her, his hand gripping hers tightly. He hadn't let go since the archives. Caspian returned from the dungeons carrying a vial of dark liquid. Thaddeus's blood, he said grimly. Freely given after I explained in detail what would happen to him if he refused. Elara didn't ask what those details were. According to the book, she explained, we need 3 things. Thaddeus's blood, which we have. Kieran's tears, which. She touched the boy's damp cheek gently. We have in abundance. And the voice of one who speaks truth in place of lies. You, Caspian said. Me, Elara agreed. I have to speak the truth of what happened to Queen Seraphina, what was done to Kieran, and why the curse must break. My words will become the counterweight to Thaddeus's lies. And if it doesn't work? Elara met the king's eyes. Then we try again. And again. Until it does work or until we find another way. I made a promise to your son, your majesty. I intend to keep it. Something flickered in Caspian's expression. Respect maybe. Or gratitude. Then let's begin, he said. They arranged themselves according to the book's instructions. Kieran in the center, sitting cross-legged. Elara behind him, her hands on his shoulders. Caspian in front, the vial of Thaddeus's blood ready. Kieran, Elara said softly. This might hurt. The curse has been part of you for 4 years. Breaking it means tearing away something that's grown attached to your very essence. But your father and I will be here the whole time. We won't let go. Do you understand? Kieran nodded, his mismatched eyes bright with determination. Then let's give you your voice back. Elara began the ritual, speaking the words from the book. They were in the old tongue, the language of humans before vampire rule. Her grandmother's words, her grandmother's magic, flowing through her. By blood spilled in malice, by tears shed in silence, by truth spoken against lies, I call forth what was stolen. Caspian poured Thaddeus's blood in a circle around Kieran. The dark liquid began to glow with unnatural light. 4 years ago, a child witnessed his mother's murder. 4 years ago, a voice was stolen to hide that crime. 4 years ago, an innocent was punished for seeing truth. The shadow collar around Kieran's neck became visible. Even Caspian could see it now, dark tendrils writhing around his son's throat like living chains. Kieran gasped, his hands flying to his neck. The pain was starting. Stay with us, Elara urged. Stay strong. I speak truth now in place of lies. Queen Seraphina was murdered by Lord Thaddeus. Prince Kieran witnessed this crime. He was cursed into silence not for his protection, but to hide treason and murder. This silence was never justice. This silence was cruelty. The collar began to crack. Kieran's back arched, his mouth opening in a silent scream. Kieran. Caspian reached for his son. Don't touch him. Elara warned. If you break the circle now, the curse will solidify. He has to endure this. He's in agony. I know. But this is the only way. Elara's hands tightened on Kieran's shoulders. By the tears of suffering I command, break. By the blood of the guilty I command, break. By the voice of truth I command, break. The shadow collar exploded. Kieran's scream filled the throne room. Not silent this time, actual sound, his voice raw and hoarse from 4 years of disuse, but undeniably real. He screamed and screamed for years of trapped words, trapped pain, trapped grief pouring out in one endless agonized sound. Caspian lunged forward, gathering his son into his arms. I've got you. I've got you. Let it out. Everything you've held inside, let it out. Kieran's screams became sobs, then words, broken, stuttering, barely intelligible, but words. She was, he killed, I saw, couldn't tell, couldn't, father, I couldn't tell you. I know, Caspian said, rocking his son. I know. But you can tell me now. You can tell me everything. He stabbed her, Kieran choked out, his voice cracking. She was holding me and there was so much blood. On my face, on my hands, she tried to tell me it was okay, but she was dying, Caspian finished, his own voice thick with tears. She was dying and you watched it happen. I tried to scream but no sound. He did something, his hands glowed and then I couldn't. For years, father, for years I couldn't say anything. I know. God help me, I know. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't see. Kieran buried his face in his father's chest, his small body racked with sobs. But he was talking. Haltingly, with a voice that cracked and wheezed, but he was talking. Elara sat back, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. She'd done it. They'd done it. Kieran had his voice back. Caspian looked up at her over his son's head. His face was wet with tears, his perfect composure completely shattered. Thank you, he said simply. Thank you for not giving up on him. For seeing what I was too blind to see. He's worth seeing, Your Majesty, Elara said softly. He always was. For the first time since she'd met him, King Caspian smiled. It was small, fragile, barely there. But it was real. Epilogue, 3 months later. Elara found Kieran in the garden, sitting beneath the willow tree where his mother's memorial stood. He was reading aloud, something he did constantly now, as if making up for 4 years of forced silence. And the knight said to the dragon, I will not fight you, for you are protecting your young. Kieran read, his voice still a bit rough but growing stronger every day. Instead, I will help you find a new home where hunters cannot reach. That's a good story, Elara said, sitting beside him. Kieran looked up and smiled. Elara. I didn't hear you coming. Lost in your book. That's always a good sign. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching butterflies dance among the flowers Caspian had planted in Seraphina's honor. Father says Lord Thaddeus's trial is next week, Kieran said quietly. The other kingdoms sent representatives. Everyone wants to see justice done. How do you feel about that?
Kieran was quiet for a long moment. Scared, he admitted. I have to testify. Tell them what I saw. What he did. His hands clenched. What if my voice doesn't work when I need it? What if I freeze? Then we'll wait until you're ready, Elara said firmly. Your father has already said you can testify through writing if speaking is too hard. Or I can speak for you, telling your story in your words. But I should be brave enough to say it myself. Kieran. Elara turned to face him fully. You've been braver than anyone should ever have to be. You survived 4 years of silence, 4 years of carrying an impossible secret, 4 years of trying to communicate when no one was listening. You have nothing left to prove. Father says telling my story is important. That other children might be hurt if we don't stop people like Thaddeus. Your father is right. But that doesn't mean you have to carry that burden alone. You have people who believe you now. People who will support you. You're not alone anymore. Kieran leaned against her shoulder. I'm glad you came, Elara. Everyone says you weren't supposed to be able to see the curse. That my grandmother's old magic chose you specially to help me. Elara smiled. Maybe it did. Or maybe I was just stubborn enough to keep looking when everyone else had stopped. I think you're magic, Kieran said seriously. The good kind. Footsteps approached. Caspian walked through the garden, his expression softening when he saw them. There you are. I've been looking everywhere. We were reading, Kieran said, holding up his book. So I see. Caspian sat on Kieran's other side, and Elara noticed how naturally the boy leaned into his father now. That casual touch, that easy affection, it had taken weeks to rebuild, but it was real now. I have something to tell you both. What is it? Kieran asked. The Royal Council has officially abolished shadow magic, Caspian said. After what Thaddeus did, after the evidence we presented, all 3 vampire kingdoms have agreed to ban its use. Anyone caught practicing shadow magic will face immediate trial. That's good, Kieran said softly. It's more than good. It means no other child can be silenced the way you were. Caspian's hand rested on Kieran's shoulder. Your voice, your testimony, helped create that change. You should be proud. I am, Kieran said. Then, more quietly, I wish Mother could have seen it. She can, Caspian said gently. Wherever she is, I believe she's watching. And I believe she's proud of you too. Kieran was quiet for a moment. Then, Father? Can I ask you something? Anything. When you thought I was just being difficult, when you thought I was choosing not to speak. Kieran's voice wavered. Did you still love me? Caspian's breath caught. He turned to face his son fully, taking both of Kieran's small hands in his larger ones. I never stopped loving you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Not for a single moment. I was frustrated, yes. I was confused and grieving and lost. I made terrible mistakes. I failed you in ways that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for. But my love for you never changed. It never could. You're my son. You're the best part of me and your mother combined. And nothing, not silence, not curses, not my own blindness, could ever change that. Tears slipped down Kieran's cheeks. I love you too, Father. Even when you weren't listening, even when you turned away, I never stopped loving you. Caspian pulled Kieran into his arms, and Elara quietly stood to give them privacy. As she walked away through the garden, she heard Kieran's voice, clear and strong, drifting after her. Father? Will you tell me about Mother? About what she was like before everything happened? And Caspian's reply, warm with memory and grief and healing love. I'll tell you everything, my son. Every story, every memory, everything I have. Your mother's voice was silenced, but through you, through your courage, her truth will live forever. Elara smiled as she left them there beneath the willow tree, father and son finally reunited, finally healing. She'd come to this castle expecting to be just another nanny in a long line of failures. Instead, she'd found a child who needed someone to see him, truly see him, and a father who needed to remember how to love through pain. The shadow collar was broken. The murderer would face justice. And Kieran, sweet, brave, resilient Kieran, had his voice back. Some endings, Elara thought, were really just new beginnings. And this was the best kind of beginning there was.